rid of that. That's awful. All right, brother. Hey, man, come and preach for us.
Thank you. It's those ear mics, brother. I've said for a long time they were the first step towards modernism. That's what we normally use at the church I'm a member of, but they kept one of these for me because I don't like the ear mics. Oh, I'm so glad to be here with you, dear folks. It has been such a great time for me. I appreciate it so very much. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate to be on your church calendar for the same week next year. And just delighted. And great time. Been my custom when I'm at the end of a meeting to share with folks my schedule for the next 3 or 4 months and ask them to pray. And it's going to be a very, very intense 3.5 month time for me. I'll spend the next 3 days with the grandchildren. That's not so intense. That'll be just great. But then Sunday, I'm in Alachua at Victory Springs Baptist Church. Tuesday, I'm preaching at a pastor's fellowship at Victory Baptist Church in Tampa. And then we head home. And a week, or on the 20th, we head out for Israel. First time I've ever been to Israel. We'll be to Israel for 10 days. And when I come back, have a day off. And then I head for Maryland, where I'll be preaching a conference. I preach the first week of March every year at Emerton Baptist Church, Bel Air, Maryland. And then the next 2 days after that will be the annual King James Bible Research Council meetings that I'm a part of every year. Will happen to be at the same church. And Thursday and Friday. Then I'm at Victory Baptist Church in McConnellsburg, Pennsylvania. And then I'm back for a couple days in the college office. And then I leave to go to the Indian Baptist Mission out in Oklahoma. They have a fellowship of Indian churches, Cherokee, Creek, there's from several of the Indian nations. And they have an annual men's conference. And I'll be at their men's conference during the middle of that week. And we'll fly from their men's conference up to Corona, Michigan to do a Baptist Heritage Conference. And then home for a couple days, and then I'll be to Indianapolis for a Baptist Heritage Conference. And leaving from there, let's see, that's the end of March. Then I go to preach a revival meeting in Rochester, Indiana. And then from Rochester, Indiana, I go to Kingsport, Tennessee for a meeting. And then for Kingsport, Tennessee to Indianapolis, Indiana for a meeting. And then I go to preach a pastor's conference in Sarifka, Indiana. Well, you've probably not heard of that, even if you're from Indiana. It is really the edge of civilization and turn left. I mean, it's the most rural place I have ever been in my ministry. And but I'll be at a pastor's conference. They have a pastor's conference every year, and I have the privilege of preaching at it. Then to Tippecanoe Bible College in Lafayette, or in church in Lafayette. And then that night at our graduation, Day Spring Bible College. And then out again the next morning to preach at Alumni Week for Heritage Baptist College. And then back home from that to for a couple days. And then I'm at First Baptist Church in Laurel, Indiana for a Saturday and Sunday meeting. And then I go from there to the Cayman Islands. It's not a vacation. I'm preaching a Bible conference on the King James Bible in the Cayman Islands for 3 days. And then back from there to Bemidji, Minnesota, and back from Bemidji, Minnesota. And then the Sunday of that week, or not the Sunday, the Wednesday of that week, I fly out for a one-night King James conference in Dallas, and then back. And then I'm in Warsaw, Indiana, and then I am in Tiffin, Iowa. That's the end of May. It's going to be a very, very busy time, and I appreciate and am grateful for your prayers. I want you to go to 1 John chapter 4 with me. This is our fourth message on what I call the Bible debate. And this is the hard one, the tough one, and I save it for last on purpose to try and build for it and set the stage. For folks that weren't with us, I have done a lot the last 3 nights to set the stage for tonight. But here we are. And I think it it tells the whole story when you get a handle on it. But I got to lay some groundwork. We're in 1 John chapter 4, and I'm going to read the first 4 verses. Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God, because many false prophecies are gone out into the world. Hereby know ye the Spirit of God, every spirit that confesseth that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is of God. And every spirit that confesseth not that Jesus Christ is come in the flesh is not of God. This is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is it in the world. Ye have God, little children, and overcome them, because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. This passage tells us where false theology comes from. It comes from Satan to evil spirits. Satan, stage 1. Evil spirits, stage 2. False prophets, people who are being willing to be misused. And then fourthly, to unsuspecting followers. Satan, evil spirits, false prophets, unsuspecting followers. It is where all false religion comes from. There is a test when you have spirit communication. The test is, what do the spirits say about Jesus Christ? Because you understand there are false spirits in this world. They're called demons. They're called devils. In the Bible, they are called familiar spirits and seducing spirits. I personally believe the pagan gods were false spirits. And they reveal themselves to people. They give people false theology, but they don't tell the truth about who they are and what they're doing. And you can't get a character reference on a demon. They claim to be gods, or they claim to be ghosts. I think in our day and age, a lot of times they claim to be beings from other planets. Or it'll be a disembodied voice. They do not say, I am a demon sent from hell, I am here to trick you. Okay? They always claim, and he said, look, there's a test here. Anytime you're dealing with spirits, what does that spirit say about Jesus Christ? Okay? This is the source of all false theology. I could teach on this for a week and have in college courses over and over again. And I give you an example. Muhammad, 600s. Muhammad marries a rich widow. She has a 2-day caravan route from one city to another. He takes over the caravan route. The caravan would go for a day, stop at a cave. He'd stay in the cave, goes on the next day, and then back. And so he's staying at this cave on a regular basis. According to Muhammad, when he was staying in this cave, angels would come to him. At least they said they were angels. And they told Muhammad that the truth had been lost on the earth since the 1st century, but that God had been looking for a man sincere enough and dedicated enough that he could be used to restore the truth. And God had finally found that man in Muhammad. And according to Muhammad, those angels dictated the Quran to him. And Islam was born. Now, when a person tells you a story like that, there are 3 possibilities. These weren't angels from God, because the Quran teaches very plainly and clearly that Jesus is not God, and that there's no blood atonement for sin. So they're not angels. They're not who they said they were. Or it goes something like this. He could have been a con man who made the story up for his own purposes. Or he could have been crazy, and he thought it happened and it didn't. Or he could have been communicating with demons. Those are the 3 possibilities. And a false religion is spawned. Okay? Or you tell Joseph Smith and the Mormons. According to Joseph Smith, angels appeared to him, and they led him to these golden plates, and the golden plates gave him the information that would become the Book of Mormon. And in the Book of Mormon, it makes it very, very clear that while Jesus was a God, he was a God just like all of us can become God. And that there is no blood atonement for sin. And out of that, Mormonism was born. When somebody tells you a story like Joseph Smith's, there are 3 possibilities. They made it up. They're crazy, or they're communicating with a demon. Okay? Another example would be Charles Taz Russell, founder of Jehovah's Witnesses. He was teaching in a Sunday school in Philadelphia, adult Sunday school class, and he was teaching that there was no real hell. And the elders of the church called him in and said, you can't teach that here. That's not our doctrinal statement. We don't believe it's the Bible. You can't be the adult Sunday school teacher anymore. So he was home the next Sunday morning when he claimed to hear a voice. I'm not just talking about the influence of the Spirit working on him. He claimed to physically hear a voice audibly with his ears. And the voice told him that it was the voice of God. And that the truth had been lost on the earth since the first century. And that God had been looking for somebody to restore the truth. And he had found it in Charles Taz Russell. He was a man of sincerity and leadership. And led him to these beliefs. Jesus is not God. There is no blood atonement. Told him there was no hell. And out of that come the Jehovah's Witness cult. It's the same procedure over and over again. Satan, evil spirits, false prophets, unsuspecting followers. People who follow in Jehovah's Witness, follow the Mormons, they do not know they're following a satanic religion. They think they're doing the right thing. Okay? I'll give you an example how this works. Some years ago, I got a call from some folks I knew, and they said, we'd like to set up a public debate, and we want to know if you'd come help us. Said somebody bought a house right across the street from a public high school, and every day when school gets out, they let the kids come over there, and they've got ping pong table and foosball and pool, and they've got food, and they've got religious studies. And we think it's a cult after our kids. We think it's a New Age cult. And we'd like to have a public debate. Have you come and debate this teacher? Okay. We wrote down a time. I studied. I'm ready to debate the New Age movement. I get there. I meet the man, and I find out he's not part of the New Age movement. And we're about to have a public debate. And he belonged to a group called the Faithists. I did not have the faintest idea what the Faithists were. I'm now about to debate him in front of 200 people. And I would only do debates with rules. He got 3 minutes, I got 3 minutes, he got 3 minutes, I got 3 minutes. So my first point was, please tell me where the information comes from that you're sharing with these teenagers. So it comes from a book called Oashby. I've never heard of Oashby before. I have since seen a copy. And you can buy them, been out of print for a while, but you can buy one for $1,000, but I'm just not interested enough. I said, okay, thank you. Where did Oashby come from? Where did this book come from? He didn't want to tell me. But I stayed on that. Tell me where Oashby comes from. See, he finally broke down and told me a story. Late 1800s, there's a man in England named John Newborough. And angels began to come to John Newborough. And they began to tell him, this will be a shock to you, that the truth has been lost on this earth since the first century. But that God had chosen John Newborough to bring it back to the earth. And they typed out a manuscript through his fingers. 1,100-page manuscript. And that's where his book came from. So thank you. I only need answer to one more question. What does Oashby say about Jesus Christ? He said, well, when you get on the other side, he learned that Jesus was a man, a great man, but only a man. Okay, now I'm ready. I know where I want to go in the debate. Let's talk 1 John 4. Try every spirit. And there's a test. Another example of how this works before we get to the subject at hand. Bob Jones Sr. started being a full-time preacher when he was in his teenage years. His mother passed away, and he started preaching meetings as a teenager. And he tells this story. He's preaching a tent meeting in a town in Alabama, and he's got a tent on one end of town, and they're having a revival meeting. And the other end of town, a medium is having seances in a tent. And he's just curious. So one night, when their meeting was over, a meeting was still going on the other end of town, he thought he'd slip in and see what this thing is. He'd slip in the back. Nobody knew he was there. He slipped in the back. The medium immediately said, "We have a distinguished visitor with us tonight, Evangelist Bob Jones." And said, "Would you like to come up on the platform and tell me who you want to talk to that's on the other side, and I will bring them to you." He thought it was going to be some kind of show. He went up, sat on a platform, so I want to talk to my mother. According to him, a white, shadowy shape began to appear on the platform and began to speak to him with a voice identical to that of his mother's. Don't be shocked if some demon can mimic somebody's voice. I know people that can mimic people's voices. I have a preacher friend in the Philippines whose son can mimic me to a point that the whole audience will break up hysterically laughing. So if people can mimic folks, don't be shocked if a demon can mimic somebody. And the Spirit begins to speak to Bob Jones, and he began to wonder if he'd been confused about things, and he speaks to the Spirit, and he said, "Mother, what is it like to be on the other side with the Lord Jesus?" And the Spirit said, "Oh, when you get on this side, you learn that Jesus is not the Lord. He's a good man, but just another man." And Bob Jones stood up and said, "You are not my mother. You're a lying demon from hell." He applied the test. It is the test God gave to all of us. Okay? Y'all got that? We could go through that, false religion after false religion after false religion. Now, to the subject at hand. We have mentioned Westcott and Hort. In the late 1800s, Westcott and Hort were two Church of England preachers, and they began to say, the King James Bible is inaccurate, and the received text is inaccurate. The proper text of Scripture was lost for 100 years, but we believe we can recover it. And so they produced a definitive Greek text that we call the minority text, because it's only based on a handful of manuscripts. And then they called for the Church of England to do a new translation of the English Bible to replace the King James. And so they were significant in that discussion and producing a new English translation. They were so opposed to the received text that Hort called it vile, and Westcott constantly talked about being set free from received text. And so they had this influence, and they began to try and convince folks, if you're educated, you're scholarly, you're intelligent, you'll understand why we need to do this, why we need to change everything. And that idea became a subject of tremendous debate. It gained a great deal of following in the Church of England, and then it gradually came to the United States, where it developed a following in the United States. Yeah. But some interesting things about Westcott and Hort. A person had put this out, and they said each of them had a book written about them by their sons. Both their sons were named Arthur. And in the books by Arthur Westcott and Arthur Hort, they said their fathers believed in a teaching called the communion of the saints, which they could not afford to be public about. The communion of the saints is a belief that when spirits die, they do not go into eternity right away. That they hang around the earth for a while, dealing with unfinished business. And according to their sons, they both believed in the communion of saints. Not a terrible shock, you find out as college students. They started with some other young men, an organization called the Ghostly Guild, which they said was supposed to investigate stories about ghosts to see if they were true or not. And they began to look at things, and some of them they said were just fake, others they said were true. Out of that came a major occult organization that still exists today and is the largest occult organization in England. Other defenders will say, they were college kids. College kids do stupid things. I've been in Bible college ministry since I was 23, okay? I've seen college kids do some pretty stupid things. I've never seen any of them start a major occult organization by accident. By the way, they would go on to start a second and a third occult organization that still exists. Organizations designed to communicate or study spirits. But according Arthur Westcott. Every night, his father would go into the chapel auditorium of the Church of England church that he pastored, would sit in the dark and wait for the spirits to come and fellowship with him. And that spirits would come in one by one until the 400-seat auditorium was full. And he would communicate with the spirits during the hours of night. And when light came, the spirits would begin to leave one by one. And when the spirits left, he would come and take his sleep during the morning. Now, I know some folks say, well, that's not true. We looked in books in print. There is no such biographies. And I heard that. I checked it out. It's true. They're not in books in print in the United States. They were from England. They were published in England. I have ordered them from England. I have read them. There are a number of accounts of their belief in the communion of the saints. Then somebody tells you a story like that. Turns out there are three possibilities. One, they're crazy. And if they're crazy, I don't want them translating the Bible for me. Or they lied and made it up. And if they lied and made it up, I don't want them translating the Bible for me. Or Westcott was communicating with an auditorium full of demons during the same time he was preparing the Westcott and Hort text and working on translating the Bible into English, in which case I really don't want him translating the Bible for me. This long maze of English translations that are in existence today, that are the challenge to the King James Bible, every one of them to some degree is based on the work of Westcott and Hort, his text. Oh, people say the New King James, and it advertises it's also received text. But if you read the book by Art Farstad, who headed up the committee that produced the New King James, he said, well, they don't have near as many minority text references as these other translations do. He said you would find the critical text on every single page of the New King James. It's in his words. Westcott and Hort? Influenced by spirits? Another English translation came out in the 1960s. Was produced by a fellow named J.B. Phillips. He wrote a book about his experience as a Bible translator, called it Ring of Truth. And when I was in college, early 1970s, I worked my way through college working at downtown Marion County Public Library in Indianapolis. And they had a quirky law in Indiana that said the library could neither sell nor give away books. And so when they wanted to take a book off the shelf and get rid of it, they had to burn it. And they had a burner in the college, or in the library parking lot. And my job for several years was to burn books. The librarians would put them in certain places. I would go around with a cart, and I would pick up all the books to be disposed. And then I would take the cart across the street into the staff parking lot where the book burner was, and I would burn the books. So happened, staff parking lot, I often parked close to the book burner. And somehow, over the years, apparently a number of books fell off the cart and ended up in my car. And one of the books was J.B. Phillips' Ring of Truth, the story of the Phillips Bible translation. I had it on my shelf for years without ever looking at it. Years later, when I become interested in this issue, I said, yeah, I didn't get that book, so I got it out. The story of how he translated the Bible. This is J.B. Phillips' account. He was pondering over the right way to translate a passage. So he wrote the noted literary figure C.S. Lewis a letter saying, how do you think I should translate this? But Lewis died before he could answer the letter. But Lewis, being a gentleman, did not want to go on to heaven, leaving his correspondence unanswered. So according to Phillips, one night he's working on translating the Bible. He's sitting in his study, and the ghost of C.S. Lewis came and talked with him for hours about the right way to translate a passage. Doesn't say which one it was in the Phillips translation. You know, when a guy tells you a story like that, there are three possibilities. He could have made it up. He didn't see a ghost. But if he's a con artist, I don't want him translating the Bible for me. Or he could be crazy and he thought it happened and it didn't. In which case, I don't want him translating the Bible for me. Or a demon could have come to his study, claimed to be the ghost of C.S. Lewis, and talked with him for hours about how to translate the Bible, in which case, I really don't want him translating the Bible for me. Now, you got it? So, I'm nowhere near done. I have mentioned these two examples in sermons, and in these days, everything gets posted on the internet. So I'd mentioned these two examples, and somebody got a hold of me, and I may not get the order of all these right, but somebody got a hold of me and said, have you seen Johann Greber's book, Communicating with the Spirits? I said, no, and they said, you ought to get it. I got a copy. He was a priest in Germany, 1930s, and he got kicked out of the Catholic Church. And he got kicked out of the Catholic Church because he said he was communicating with spirits, and the spirits told him a list of things. One of the things the spirits told him is that Jesus was not God, and so he should quit preaching that Jesus was God. One of the other things that the spirits told him was never, ever, ever trust a Bible based on the received text, like the King James Bible is. And when a guy tells you he had an experience like that, there are three possibilities. So I mentioned, somebody told me that. I mentioned that. Somebody got home and said, you don't know the rest of the Greber story, do you? No. They said after he got kicked out of the Catholic Church, he came to the United States. And in the United States, he translated the New Testament into English. And his translation is the translation used by the spiritualist group to this day. So I looked it up. Sure enough, it comes out of a spiritualist church in Flint, Michigan, and they sell copies of the Greber Bible. I ordered a copy, and in the introduction, he tells his experience, how he comes to the United States, he wants to translate the Bible into English, and how spirits would come to him and aid him every day in the translation. By the way, if you get in the Greber Bible, it will be very, very clear that Jesus was not God. And you know how they translate 1 John 4? How he translates 1 John 4? He doesn't translate it, try the spirits. He translates it, trust the spirits. And by his own account, the spirits told him that he needed to have some verses that did not exist in any Greek manuscript of any kind anywhere, but those spirits dictated those verses to him. So I mentioned that. Somebody got a hold of me and said, you don't know the rest of the story, do you? I said, what rest of the story? When the Jehovah's Witnesses started, Charles Taze Russell produced a Bible that he said he translated from Westcott and Hort. Baptist preacher said, you didn't translate it, you're lying, you don't know Greek. Russell sued him for slander. He went to court. In court, they got Russell on the stand, and the Baptist preacher's lawyer said, you know Greek? He said, yes. You know Greek well enough to translate? Yes, I do. He handed him a Greek New Testament and said, read it. He didn't even know it was upside down. The original Jehovah's Witness Bible is completely discredited. He just went through an English Bible and took it and changed it so it said what he wanted. So as years went on, Jehovah's Witnesses decided they needed to sponsor a Bible translation. And so they brought a group of scholars together. They will not give you the names of the scholars, but they will tell you what materials they had in front of them when they translated. And they had Greber's Bible as one of their resources. And their famous translation in John 1, which makes it clear that Jesus was not God, is a word-for-word quote from the Greber Bible. And so that got me interested. I wondered about some of the other cults. Turned out Joseph Smith did a Mormon translation of the Bible. So discredited, even the Mormons don't use it today, but you can still purchase it. So I purchased the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. And in the introduction, Joseph Smith tells the story about how the spirits came to him and helped him day by day as he translated the Joseph Smith translation, which, by the way, clearly teaches that Jesus was not God. Now, when a guy tells you a story like that, turns out there are three possibilities. But it doesn't matter which one of them is true. I don't want him translating the Bible for me. But he's telling the story and said he had a person check his translation, work with him. I said, I've seen that name somewhere before. Rigdon. I got to checking. Alexander Campbell, founder of the Church of Disciples of Christ and Churches of Christ that teach salvation is based on baptism, did his own translation of the Bible, and the same person that helped Joseph Smith helped him. And that translation of the Bible makes it very, very clear that salvation is baptism. It doesn't have anything to do with the blood of Christ. Wow. I keep telling these stories, and people say, but do you know about this? Do you know about this? Do you know about this? Here's one for you. Virginia Mollenkott, consultant for the New International Version Bible. One of the most popular Bibles in our churches today. And she was a consultant. She's who they were supposed to go to when they wanted the proper way to say it in English. Okay. And she's written a series of books. She began from a Christian family, Bible-believing church, went to a Christian school, went to a major Christian university, graduated from that university, got married, taught at that university, went from that university to another Bible college and taught at that Bible college, and then she announced her marriage to her husband had been a mistake, that God had made her a lesbian. And she was not teaching at Christian colleges anymore. She began to teach in secular colleges. She is one of the originators of the gender fluid theory that you're hearing about today all the time. She wrote books about it. But in her book, Sensuous Spirituality, she's telling the story of how she came to all this. And she told the story of her background and how she used to believe the King James Bible and was bound by the King James Bible and all that. But she said the day came when she was set free from the King James Bible. When she was set free from the King James Bible, that embarked her on a path that led her to embrace her lesbianism and then to go on and develop this gender theory, one of the originators of it. And she tells this story. She said when she got set free from the King James Bible, she says the Holy Spirit came to her and began to speak to her audibly. And not just the Holy Spirit. Angels began to come to her and speak to her audibly. And not just angels. He said other spirits began to come to her on a daily basis and speak with her audibly. All while she's producing the gender fluid theory books. Now, when a person tells you a story like that, there are three possibilities. She could be crazy. In which case, I don't think I want her being the consultant on any Bible that I trust. Or she could have made all that up. In which case, I don't want her work on a Bible translation. Or maybe she really thought she heard the Holy Spirit and she thought she was dealing with angels and she said she really was dealing with other spirits, in which case she was being led by demons in the whole process. Man, y'all get it? Where does false theology come from? I pastored Ravenswood Baptist Church in Chicago. Right down, a couple blocks down, there was a church called the Community Christian Church. And I wondered what it was, and I saw a man going in there one day. I stopped, introduced myself. He's a pastor. I talked to him a little bit. He said, we believe in the communion of the saints. He said, we minister to spirits from before birth until after death. He said, when we have our services on Sunday, the spirits of the preborn and the spirits of the dead join us in the service. And he said, the apartment building right across the street from your church we own. And that's our international seminary. And we bring in young people from all over the world. And we have classrooms in that building, and then that the rest of the building serves their dorm, and we train them how to commune with the spirits. And I looked them up on the internet. Sure enough, they said ministry from before the cradle to after the grave. Wow. One day we're having a revival meeting, and some of the girls from the seminary, college-age young ladies, pretty young ladies, were sitting out on the porch. A couple of my young men came up to me. They didn't have any idea what the place was. They said, Pastor, would there be anything wrong if we went over and invited them to church? I said, your zealous, soul-winning burden for attractive young women is just impressive. But I said, that'll be fine. You go over and invite them if you want to. So they went over and talked to him for a while. Those guys came back like this. What are they? And I said, when they say they're communicating with the spirits of the preborn and the dead, well, you can figure that out. There's three possibilities. By the way, one of the things they taught was if a lady was pregnant and there was a baby in her womb, and of course that baby would be a human life, they said you can communicate with the spirit ahead of time and get permission to have an abortion, and the spirit will just move to another person, and that way you will not be guilty of murder. You know how they know that? The spirits told them. Man, y'all got it? I'm not done. I kept adding to the message, these more examples, and somebody got a hold of me and they said, Brother Stringer, are you familiar with Theosophy? I said, I know it's a cult. I know a little bit about it. Teacher said, but have you really looked at the teaching that they have 7 levels that you go through, and you communicate with spirits at the first level, and then you communicate with more advanced spirits at the second level, and so forth. I know all that. They said, have you ever seen the list of things that the spirits at the 7th level teach a person? So I really can't say I have. They said you should. Look it up. If you ever get to the point you're dealing with the most advanced spirits, they will tell you never, ever, ever use a Bible based on the received text. Make sure you use a Bible based on the Westcott and Hort text. There's advice to live by. Did y'all get it? If you were the devil, could you think of a more crafty idea to deceive people than to have them think they're reading the Bible, and it's got false information in them to point them the wrong direction? Could you think of a more clever trick? We are dealing with a very, very clever devil. Manly Hall, who wrote one of the major textbooks for Masonry, he said, this is our challenge. He said, we got to get people off the King James Bible. He said, if we could just figure out how to get people away from the King James Bible, we could bring about world peace and all these things. And he couldn't. So we can't figure out how to get people to give up the King James Bible. By the way, and I just got this information today, there's a major conference being hosted by some independent Baptist pastors, 4 pastors, about how to transition your church and get your church away from the King James Bible. I know 3 of them. One of them I asked, because I knew he was going through some changes. I said, what's your position on the King James Bible? And he said, oh, no. I said, we'll keep the King James Bible. We're not changing that. Well, apparently over the last 3 years, that answer has changed. You get the point? It has been a major campaign of evil spirits to get Bibles in front of people that do not teach clearly the deed of Christ, do not teach the plan of salvation clearly, do not teach God's moral code clearly or at all. Because it's so clever, folks sit there with what they believe is the Bible. And in independent Baptist churches all over America, they're sitting there with a Bible on which the number one consultant was Virginia Mollenkott. Now, do not rush out and say, you just can't believe what I just heard at church. And man, you're using a satanic Bible. Do not do that. People will not be able to understand it. You will do more harm than good. Listen to me on this. Here's what's hurt the King James Bible movement worse than anything. We got a lot of loudmouth nutcases in our movement who are just going around attacking people. Do not start by giving people more information they can handle. They'll just think you're one of them. Ask questions. Why do you trust Bible based on the Westcott and Hort text when so many Bible believers don't? Most of them say, what? They don't have any idea what you're talking about. I had lunch with the president of one of the United States' major Bible societies a few years ago. Lives in Chicago when I was pastoring in Chicago. And I talked to him about this, and he didn't know there were two different text types. He didn't know what the Westcott and Hort text was. He was the president of a major Bible society that raises millions of dollars every year to print Bibles based on the Westcott and Hort text, and he did not know who Westcott and Hort were. I'm telling you, we got a long way, because what everybody says, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. They are not all the same. Over and over again, you'll find out they're not all the same. For example, the New International Version has 64,000 fewer words than the King James Bible. That sounds like a big number to me. One, in terms of God's words, would be a big number. But 64,000 does not sound like a little number, or they're all the same to me, or anywhere close. 64,000 words from 5,000 different places. We've been told this doesn't make any difference, but it does. Over and over and over again. 1 John 5:7, basic verse on the Trinity. I have a chapter on it in my book on the King James out there. And you'll look in Bibles like the NIV, and it's not there. That verse is not there. Well, they say they've got their reasons. I've answered all their reasons, as lots of other people have. Okay. They say, well, that verse was invented in the 1600s. As I mentioned to you, I was in the Waldensian Museum, and the museum curators were looking in their Latin Bible from the 900s, and that verse was there. It wasn't invented in the 1600s. It was quoted by Bible teachers in the 200s. But don't go out and beat up on somebody with what I just gave you. That will not do anything for the cause of Christ. If you think you have to deal with it, ask people questions. So, who is it on the translation committee for the New International Version that you trust? That causes you to trust it so much? Why do you trust the text it's based on? Why do you trust the method they use? You remember our first night? I trust the King James Bible because it's based on the right text. I trust the King James Bible because it's translated by the right men. Ask them why they trust the men it translated. Or pick anyone you want to so much. Why do you trust them so much? Why do you trust the method they used? And almost everyone said, well, I don't know anything about that stuff. Seriously? You just changed Bibles? And you haven't done any research? I'm promising you, a lot of our independent Baptist pastors don't know any of this. It's not that they're consciously rebellious about it. They just don't know. They've never looked at it. It hasn't been a topic of study. But this stuff absolutely matters. By the way, Virginia Mollenkott was not the only homosexual on the translation committee for the NIV. And this just comes as a surprise. In most of the passages in the Bible that condemn homosexuality, they've taken out the word sodomite and put in temple prostitute. The NIV does not condemn homosexuality. It condemns temple prostitution. By the way, pretty safe to condemn temple prostitution because they don't have a lobby that'll come after you. They just changed the words. Well, if you had homosexuals on the committee, can you imagine why there would be pressure to do that? Do you think Virginia Mollenkott wanted to encourage verses condemning homosexuality? In her own writing, she said she was able to have a lot of influence on the NIV, not as much as she wanted, but a lot. Seriously, is that who you trust to deal with the Bible? Learn to ask questions. Learn to ask lots of questions. Why do you trust the minority text, the critical text? Why do you trust Westcott and Hort? Why do you trust anything based on their text? Why do you trust the people? Who are the people that translated the Bible you're using, and why do you trust them? Y'all got it? Satan. To evil spirits. Evil spirits to false prophets. False prophets to unsuspecting followers. Okay. All kinds of independent Baptist preachers using the NIV that don't know, they have the faintest idea who Virginia Mollenkott is or what her story is. Okay. The ESV is the fad Bible of the moment. And the fellow that headed up that translation has actually been kind in what he has said about me, even though we have a massive disagreement. But he has said kind things about me. I appreciate his kindness. But I asked him, can you tell me why you trust the Westcott and Hort text? He wouldn't answer me. Yeah. From Satan. To evil spirits. From evil spirits to false prophets. From false prophets to unsuspecting followers. They're not doing this on purpose. Okay? They should not be treated like they're doing it on purpose. You won't help anybody if you treat them like they're doing it on purpose. By the way, you understand why I waited till the last message to go to this? I was trying to set some groundwork first. But it is a very simple principle. When somebody tells you they've had contact with spirits, there is a test for the spirits. What did the spirits that Westcott was dealing with tell him about the deity of Christ? Oh, I don't know. But I know in his text, many of the verses about the deity of Christ are removed. So what does that tell you? Okay. J.B. Phillips, I don't know what the ghost of C.S. Lewis told him, but if you'll read the Phillips translation, most of the verses about the deity of Christ have been changed. Y'all got it? You say, well, in the New King James, most of the verses about the deity of Christ are there. That's true. Okay? But they still have the influence of the critical text in their own statement. A statement by the editor of the whole project said you can find the critical text on every page. I believe him, met him, talked to him, nice guy. If he says the critical text on every page, I'm not arguing. Y'all got it? Glory to God, it's important we hold these truths. You should thank God you have a pastor that holds the line on this and does what's right. God bless you.